We are pleased to have you back here at Insight Sphere, where we continue to disclose truths about the political situation in Ecuador. The recent assassination of Ecuadorian presidential contender Fernando Villavicencio shed some light on the country's precarious political climate. Earlier this month, President Guillermo Lasso disbanded Ecuador's legislature by using a clause that was added to Ecuador's constitution in 2008 as a reaction to persistent political instability. Lasso was facing an impeachment trial at the time of the dissolution of the legislature. This clause, which is often referred to as muerte cruzada, which literally translates to mutual death, gives the president and the Congress the right to organize early elections for the presidency and the legislature to take place in August. Why would Lasso, who will be voted to a term that lasts for 4 years starting in 2021, choose to end his tenure early? To have a better understanding of what is going on in Ecuador, we are going to go over 4 essential aspects. 1. Raffael Correa. Those members of Ecuador's National Assembly who remain faithful to former President Raffael Correa, who presided over the nation from 2007 to 2017, make up the most significant political force in the legislature. Lasso was a notable critic of Correa's charismatic and populist leadership at a time when Ecuador borrowed substantially, mainly from China, and saw its democracy stressed by Correa's authoritarian impulses, manipulation of the court, and persecution of the press and political opponents. This occurred during a time when Ecuador was deeply in debt. China was the primary lender during this time. It would seem that Correa is gearing himself for a return to political life. Lenin Moreno, who succeeded Correa as president, began the process of democratic and institutional rehabilitation in Ecuador. This process includes conducting investigations into allegations of corruption and abuse of power made by the previous government. In the year 2020, a court in Ecuador convicted Correa guilty of participating in the bribery scheme involving Odebrecht and sentenced him to 8 years in jail for his actions. Along with Correa's former vice president, some of his ministers were also found guilty of this felony as well as other offenses connected to it. At the same time, investigators started looking back at sentences handed down in instances that had targeted political opponents of President Correa. Correa relocated to Belgium while the inquiries into his behavior were still ongoing. Now, though, it looks like he is getting ready to make a return to the political arena. Correa's supporters were successful in derailing the president's program, winning most of the local elections, and cutting Lasso's tenure in office in half during the roughly 2 years that Lasso served as president. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video so far. 2. A crisis of security. The level of security has significantly declined throughout the whole area, but the situation in Ecuador is especially concerning due to its severity. Since the murder rate has increased by a factor of 4 in only the past 2 years, the nation has gone from being one of the least violent in the area to being one of the most violent in the whole world. The terrible sight of murders, both inside and outside of jails, has the effect of undermining public faith in the administration. Conflicts between drug trafficking groups, especially Mexican cartels, competing for control of territory in Ecuador's ports have been complex for Lasso to manage. These ports are vital routes for transporting drugs from Colombia and Peru to the United States and Europe. Even worse, the growth of organized crime has led to corruption in Ecuador's judicial system, which has further damaged Lasso's image. 3. Ineffective management. The only difficulty Lasso faced was not related to security. His cabinet, which was mostly made up of persons from the business sector, was put through a rigorous educational process. This lack of expertise, along with the unyielding resistance in Congress, prevented Lasso from achieving any significant public policy victories. His cabinet, which was mostly made up of persons from the private sector, had a steep learning curve ahead of them. As a direct consequence of this, the government had a difficult time handling even the most fundamental of its tasks, including the execution of its budget in areas like the energy and public works sectors. This took place at a time when domestic and foreign investment was restricted, and in a country that was still fighting to recover economically from the aftermath of the epidemic, when poverty and unemployment were on the rise. 4. Misjudging the capabilities of one's opponent. Lasso was prone to underestimating his opponents, having trouble recognizing his enemies at times, avoiding confrontation as much as possible, and consistently overestimating his political power and support from the public. Meanwhile, He swiftly lost supporters and squandered chances to negotiate agreements and construct a coalition. In the meanwhile, the situation became more dire. It's possible that his decision to call a nationwide vote on constitutional change in February was his largest error in judgment, but it's certainly up there. Voters jumped at the chance to punish Lasso by voting against all 8 of the planned changes, and they were successful. This error came at a high price. The results were disastrous for the president, and the effort's failure diverted Lasso from the upcoming municipal elections, which allowed the opposition to set the tone for the campaign. What's next? On August 20th, Ecuadorians will go to the polls to pick a president and lawmakers. The new president and legislators will serve for the balance of the current government's mandate, which is until May 2025. The elections will take place in a highly politicized climate that is politically fractured, and there will be a complex network of candidates to choose from. The deadline for candidate registration is June 10th, although the campaign proper has already started unofficially. The public discourse will be primarily focused on problems relating to safety and the legacy of Raffael Correa. And there you have it. Those who go into the unknown, search for the truth and have naturally inquisitive brains. In this episode of Insight Sphere, Unveiling Realities, we continue our travels across the spheres of knowledge and discovery. Your comments and observations provide fuel for our search for the truth. Thus, keep those dialogues going in the part below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.